For me, education is all about giving wings to fly really high, yet giving them strong roots to be grounded.
And after 33 years of that teaching, that's a true transformation that I know that I actually don't know anything.
So the teacher's job in the classroom is much, much more complicated than our teachers was when we were a student.
But I think what went in because of the failure, and I have a feeling we should expose children to failures rather than success.
Welcome to this wonderful conversation that we're going to have. So today's conversation is about 2040. And I want you all to spend a minute thinking about what schools might look like in 2040. How many of you are excited about the world in 2040 and the world that, our kids are going to inherit in 2040? The road ahead. Okay, so that's a few people. How many of you are terrified about the road ahead and the world our children will be in 2040? Okay, so lots of people who haven't raised their hand for either, so there must be a bunch of other options, right? Okay, so we're going to get started. And, I've been thinking a little bit about the world ahead, the future of work, the future that our children will inherit. And we know that many of the jobs they will do have not even been invented yet, right? We know that technology is changing, knowledge is growing exponentially, and kids have technology and knowledge at their fingertips, but that's not all kids. There's also a lot of inequity in the world, and that's growing. And we know that we have climate issues, environmental issues, so many different things that the world in 2040 will be contending with. So my question for our wonderful panelists today is, what do you think will make schools, since we are all in the business of schools particularly, will make schools relevant for 2040? And as you think about the future school, right, a school that is getting kids ready for the future and that's ready to change and upgrade itself, what would the school look like? And can we start with Dr. Madhav?
I think whatever we will be talking today, and please forgive me for saying so, might not be taken as badbad. Because whatever we are going to talk today is purely based on assumptions. And to, plan something which is unknown, and that is for sure that we know that we are planning ourselves for unknown. And then we start planning. So there could be 2-3 bases for this. And in my humble opinion, one could be intellectual arrogance, that we might plan ourselves for unknown. Another could be that for several centuries we have been celebrating only cerebral abilities, the mental capabilities. So we think that, our mind and the 5 senses Sir talked about are good enough to project ourselves 18 years ahead of us. The fact is that, and Mr. Mukesh Shelat is my senior colleague. Today in the morning, he said that, Madhav, what a transformation. And that word, I don't know whether he meant it for good or bad, but he said, what a transformation. And I have been thinking about that word, and I was thinking about myself that I was 19 and a half when I started teaching. What an arrogant man I was, and how I used to treat my students. Because the way I was taught and the kind of mastery I had on my subject, it was truly unparalleled at that age, and where I never needed a reference to make whatever I had to teach. And because I knew everything, So I was actually ill-treating my students. And after 33 years of that teaching, that's a true transformation that I know that I actually don't know anything. I was telling someone that now I wish to sing one song to my students, and that song is "Tumko jo ho pasand wahi baat karenge." Thank you. So, I don't know what kind of word we are going to leave for our kids. So that's one. What kind of skill sets we would require, I don't know. I don't have the capacity to delve into that skill sets. But one thing I have learned out of my experience, that if we take away the focus from the person, then everything is lost. At this point of time, the only thing which we are sure of is the person, the being. And the more we focus on the child, the more we focus on the being, the more we prepare the child for uncertainty, perhaps we will be able to do justice as their caretakers, not as their educators. Only as their caretakers and their custodians, because they have come to this world through us, and we happen to be in the service of education.
Such a lovely, lovely answer, right? Focusing on the child and the being, and these fundamental things that actually may not change, right? Some things are changing so rapidly, but some things we know as humans are central to being human. Ms. Revathi, would you like to share about your thoughts about the future school?
So let's take first-time parents. Young parents who become parents for the first time. What do they think for their child? That they can bestow on that child every possible gift. What I didn't get, I want to give it to my child. And what can be the best that the child can get, so that when he grows up, he's comfortable and he's a big man or woman, whatever. That's stars in their eyes and absolutely dreams in every thought of theirs. If every teacher starts thinking the same as the child walks into her class, what a world we'll be in. The world has changed after 2020. So we are in a new world. We need a new mindset. A new mindset that has a different and a very strong sense of purpose. A great agency. New skill set. And a purpose that, yes, these are going to be the possible competencies that we can build in our children. Not the outcomes. Because the outcomes we can't decide on. So if that is the world that we are going to be building in, how much of that effort must go in from each of our children, of our teachers inside a classroom? So if I own them up, building in them the strongest skills and the strongest values. For me, education is all about giving wings to fly really high, yet giving them strong roots to be grounded, because that will give them a clear vision. So in a world that we're going to be living in, we can't just make children learn one aspect of it. We don't learn from Facebook, we don't learn from Google. So we have to give them every possible thing in our own schools, which will give them the right environment, a conducive environment that will help them learn, where their mind can be liberal and they have a choice. And let them build all the skill sets that are required. We don't know what the future is going to be like. We really don't know what the world that they're going to be is going to be like. We are all moving in the dark. But yet, we, as every new parent, and I started with that, new parent thinks, this is what I want my child to get and be strong about. That's what every teacher has to do. Let me give the best of everything back to our children. Because 2040 is really 18 years, and it's a long period. There are going to be many disruptions, but can I give my children the strength and all the qualities and the values that will keep them strong, despite all the turmoils that may come through. And if they're able to sail their boat, I think we have done our jobs well. But for that, each one of us as educators must think differently. And I think that should begin with each one of us sitting here who are school leaders. How are we going to sail the new boat? And how are we going to face all the oceans and the currents in the oceans? And how do we see that it's not about today? It's not about getting the best results. It's much beyond that. Because all of us talk about our school life. It wasn't bad at all. So we have got some very lovely memories. Can we give so many more beautiful memories to our children so that they take that forward? I always believe every school, when we draw the first S curve, that's a success curve, there is a point when you reach at the peak, but that's the beginning of a new S. It goes like this. That's your DNA. That's the DNA of your school.
Vadakkam. My first learning today morning has been the difference between usage of Vadakkam and Namaskaram, and the nuance between the two greetings. And this was the only topic of discussion with the gentleman who drove me from the airport an hour back, and how it has connotations which probably most of you understand, but were new for me. So I was more learned already as I was arriving. But once I came in, I've been blown away. I have been absolutely blown away. I've attended a lot of Sahodaya conferences in my life. But the kind of questions that are being asked over these 2 days here are phenomenal. So congratulations to those who curated these 2 days. Now, in response to the question you asked on what's the future and where are schools headed, I'm an optimist. I believe we are headed towards the brightest times that humankind has ever seen. And I feel this because we've never been more curious as a race in comparison to what we are right now. For we've never had so much information to process as we have right now. My elder daughter, who's 8, a couple of years back, she was struggling with a particular word and she came to ask me for the meaning. I'm of the belief that I am not here to give answers to my children. I'm here to get them to ask more questions. So I said to Jaspreet, I wonder what's the answer to this word or the meaning of this word. How do you think we can find out? And I thought she would say, okay, I'll go look up a dictionary. And she says, okay, let me go ask Siri. Her response to that was, let me ask Siri. So I kind of disagree with you that we don't learn from Google. We don't learn from Facebook. I think we learn from all of these interfaces. We just choose what we learn from these interfaces. But the total information available to our young learners is more than ever before. Now, how does this impact the classroom? When I was growing up, and perhaps when most people in this audience were growing up, and we would go to school, the difference between that student who knew least and the one who knew most about that topic was, one of them had read the book and the other one hadn't. But that was the only information available to them. But to that teacher who teaches that same concept right now, that gap is big. I remember walking into a grade 3 classroom where the teacher had just finished teaching the states of matter. And I went in and asked these kids, how many states of matter? Expecting the answer to be 3, solid, liquid, gas. So the child says, sir, 4. Now, wanting to save him some embarrassment, I went to him and asked him, darling, which four? And he says, well, solid, liquid, gas, everybody knows that, but then there is also plasma. I am very sure that teacher that day had not gone into that classroom thinking, I will discuss plasma as a state of matter. And that wasn't in his course book. So the teacher's job in the classroom is much, much more complicated than our teachers was when we were a student. And that brings me to my response to what about the future of schools? I believe the schools will exist. There is no doubt about it. And if one thing that has taught us that is the pandemic. When there was no teacher, we all saw how much technology was able to teach children. While the content might have gotten placed, but the human element of teacher, the empathy that the teacher brings into the classroom is going to stay. And let us also not forget, parents leave their children with us and go to work, knowing that their children will be safe. So these physical spaces where children congregate will exist in 2040, but perhaps not to disseminate content, but to do much, much more, which society as a whole was doing for us in 1970s and 80s, where there was a communal ownership of children, which doesn't exist now. So much more on pastoral care would happen, much more on mental health would happen, and much more on community will happen. And that's something that the new national education policy is talking about. That how do you bring community, how do you bring that assessment as a 360-degree assessment, where the child has a take, where the parent has a take, the teacher has a take. But an aspiration, on this long flight from Delhi today morning, I was reading this lovely new document that got released in October, the National Curriculum Framework for Foundational Stage. This document talks to mothers 34 times, mentions the word mother 34 times. Do you know how many times we read father? 4 times. And out of that 3 times, it's an example of an answer from a child. This entire document doesn't talk to the father. So my aspirational statement here is, I would want fathers to become more involved in parenting of their child through policy and also through practice. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really interesting, right? To think about just how learning is changing, too. I think it's fascinating. I was having a conversation with a professor from IIT, and he was talking about, automation and how everything is changing and being automated. And he said there are 2 things that will keep people, that will allow people to become employable in the future: empathy and creativity. So he says if we can have our kids, our schools, really start to think about empathy and creativity, because those are the things that we can't automate. Those are the things that will kind of distinguish what our children do in the future. So I'd like to have Mukesh sir share your thoughts.
Maya, I was hoping mera number kab aayega. Well, I've got it, thankfully. I was listening very intently to Raja sir, and he talked about a dichotomy, a duality, Advaita and Vishishta Advaita. It was very beautiful. And I was trying to apply that into the context of schools while I was, if I think schooling or the purpose of schooling is unraveling the mystery between known unknowns and unknown knowns, then I think schools will exist everywhere. You won't have to have a school as we see it per se. When you ask a child to draw a school building, or we have to do that, we do that. I don't see schools happening of that kind at all. And I don't know if I will live to see 2040, but if there is an entrepreneur who's willing to, bet his money on me, I would definitely like to create a school which is just an open playground with little huts. And a lot of learning can happen through technology at home. A lot of self-learning. Teachers can have their modules, use your Flipgrid, use whatever you want in technology. But when they come to school, they kind of look at whatever they've done, or as he rightly said, plasma, children will learn, self-learning will happen. And then what happens is, the difference between the chaff and the grain in the information and wisdom that T.S. Eliot talked about. So I think that is what perhaps a school should look like in 2040. Why 2040? Why not in the next few years? This is what I would perhaps want a school to look like. So a lot of those discussions can happen, academic discussions, as you said, mental health. Let them just play, let them have theater, let them have the sports, because you know, so much of these things, what we call the hidden curriculum is, in the education circles, happen or transacted through these beautiful activities. I mean, you know, a lot of people have been talking about successes, but I must say that I was a big failure as a student. You know, I studied here in Chennai, Venkat Subbarao School, Tirumalai Pillai Road la padichen. Yet in the 8th class, I failed. And I don't mind acknowledging that at all. And that 1 year of failure, not that it helped my geography become better or my simultaneous equations better, but I think what went in because of the failure. And I have a feeling we should expose children to failures rather than success. We learn a lot through the failures. And I don't hesitate. Wherever I go, I talk about my failure as such, because perhaps that is the only reason why I'm sitting here today. Thank you.
That's really interesting, actually, because we're a system, as a system of schools, everyone's terrified of failure. That's like the worst thing for most parents and kids, right? So part of it is also, how do we change how we think about failure? Maybe if we're getting kids future ready, we need to have them think about failure in a completely different way and have our schools give them opportunities to fail, right?
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. So you know what we've done? I'll give you a little practical case studies, as I said yesterday. We've done a lot of these things at DPS Varanasi. You know, once the pandemic stopped and we all got back, we do this session with our senior children called Failure Stories. And we invite people to talk about their failures. And children learn so much about it that, you know, today children have on their own tried to find out people who have failed. You know, people who have succeeded, of course, but through failures, failure being a stepping stone to success. And they bring and say, sir, we would like to meet so-and-so person from there. And we've had all kinds of people, you know, interacting. We began with our, you know, bus guard, you know, why she became a bus guard and why couldn't she become something. So from there to perhaps, you know, the Banaras beads entrepreneur who makes those few beautiful necklaces which the women wear. So from there to there, you know, we've had the local chaiwala there outside who has the chai there. We invited him and said, "Bhai, tum chaiwala kyun bane?" I mean, you know, and we realized that, you know, there is an MBA chaiwala in Varanasi. Then he told us that this is my franchisee. I've started this called the MBA. I am an MBA, but now I'm a chaiwala because I earn a little more, you know, through the chai than perhaps what I could not. So several things like this we've kind of done as we go. I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation.
So I had one other question now about, you know, as we think about schools of the future, and one answer to the question I'm going to ask might be how we rethink failure. But if you had to say one thing that our schools and our whole system, you know, of schooling currently does that you think we need to let go of to actually to kind of become more relevant, what would it be?
I think assessments. The kind of assessments that we do. We become so judgmental with our, you know, I've got a little WhatsApp forward, again, very interesting. Teacher ne pucha jo kabhi marta nahi hai. You know, Hindi teacher. The word is Amar, obviously, that's the answer you want. But this child is written South Indian film ka hero. I mean, a brilliant answer, I thought. You know, so this is how we need to get rid of this.
Ms. Revathi, would you like to share?
I think it's about conformity. I think we just want everyone to toe the same line. That needs to break.
God give me the strength to change the things I can, courage to accept the things I cannot change, but above all, wisdom to know the difference.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
So when we say we want to go away from content, which a lot of our classrooms are imparting right now, we can't run away from the reality of the school exit exams that these children have and the aspiration those families have from the school of what are we preparing these children for. But can we prepare, in the same time, can we prepare them for something more, like a bolt-on, an add-on, is something that we should be asking ourselves as schools. So, sir spoke about failure, which reminded me of a program that we've been running in our school for a while. And I'd be very happy, if it is of interest to you, I'd be very happy sharing our detailed plans of how we execute it. So from grade 1 onwards, we make every child in the school run a business with real money. Grade 1 is also when we would teach him plus and minus. So he doesn't know how to give change. That's when a grade 2 or a grade 3 child comes in. But what happens is all children come with a business idea each, share that business idea with their classmates, and together as a class, they decide on one business idea. The school then funds that business idea with 20,000 rupees so that they don't have to go back to their parents and ask for money. And then the children run this business for 1 year. There are micro competitions, and eventually they declare their balance sheets. If they have made a loss, the school forgets about that money, and whatever money is left, we just take it back. If they've made a profit, then they take the profit and decide what to do with it. But in that entire process, they are needing to solve problems that their course curriculum hasn't asked them, that a book will never prepare them for. And as a result, allow them to fail and for the system to be okay with that failure, because nobody is in it for the money. And we feel children really thriving in that experience. And a lot of times adults trying to stop them, but them succeeding nonetheless. So, short answer, the 1 mark answer, let us allow them to thrive. They have the capacity to do so.
Tomorrow, unlike us, our kids will have twofold challenges minimum. The first is to thrive, and another is to survive. So we would have to prepare them in every sense that compared to our lives, they would have minimum twofold challenges. So be it physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. So that's my take for tomorrow. And we have to start talking to them from today itself. Ma'am has talked about 1-year-old grandchild that she has started speaking full sentences. So we should not doubt the capabilities of our kids even for a fraction of a second. Or I would say of a soul, of a being, not person. However, as a teacher, I would like to see the change in the approach. Example, I am borrowing, sir, your evaluation vis-a-vis evolution. You test your child. You evaluate your child. But are you evaluating your child in comparison to another child, or you are evaluating your child comparison to what she was yesterday or an hour before when she entered your classroom? So a change in approach. Should I be teaching critical thinking? Should I be teaching creative thinking? Again, change in the approach, nothing changes other than. There is so much of noise of information. Should I be further bombarding the child with more information? Or should I helping the child to be silent, go within, strengthen yourself, seek only what you need, not what the word is providing you. Again, it's only the change in the approach. Should I helping my child to be the champion in boxing, or should I be helping my child to strengthen her lungs? I think strengthening lungs would be better than to the gold medal in any other sport, because that might become the need of tomorrow. So my humble submission to all my fellow colleagues is that a bit of change in our approach might help us. Instead of becoming a principal, perhaps if I could become a learning officer. Don't leave that chief, because it gives you a kick. So chief learning officer. Now people have started writing him, that how do you pronounce me? So the principal can write within brackets chief learning officer. The teacher could start writing that I am a content curator. I'm just, thinking loud. Another approach I am actually serious about is that this static curriculum is not going to help us. Even though that is the necessity, we have to have that. But if there could be a possibility of adding some dynamic curriculum along with the static curriculums, that's my thing.
These are all fascinating responses. Thank you all so much. I'm going to try the Menti now. We're going to see if we can make this work, okay? So I think I'm going to need some help in terms of how, yes. So our question for you is going to be, what are the biggest challenges facing principals and schools today, okay? So we've been talking about kind of 2040 and how the world's changing. We're going to kind of come back to now and start thinking about, as principals, as school leaders, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing? Unfortunately, with Menti, they only give you can only put in a few options, right? I'm sure there are many, many other things, but we've given you a few different options here, and I want you to, if you go on to menti.com and on your phones, and you can all vote. You can see them real time, which is kind of cool to see what teachers and principals in the room are saying.
I wasn't alone with the mental health.
I mean, what I'm finding really interesting is that mental health issues is topping the list by quite a large margin.
Absolutely. That's true. Especially
That's
after the
true.
pandemic, it's become
Yes, I think coming out of the pandemic.
absolute focus.
Yes, and yeah, definitely. And actually, a lot of the research I've been reading says that the generation that is having the most mental health issues are young people.
Yep.
So it's our younger generation, up till age 30, that is struggling the most. So that's very interesting. And given that, I'm going to ask you all a question about, I wanted to get into teacher recruitment and retention, so we will. But I also, since 50 people in the audience, 51, it's just rising, have brought in mental health. I feel like that's something we should address as we think about running schools and advice for principals, right? As we're all educators here. What would you say, I'm going to start with Mrs. Revathi. What would you say we need to be doing as we think about mental health challenges and how they're changing and growing? I mean, the fact that this is such a large margin is, I'm quite surprised, actually. What do you think, as principals, as school leaders, as we prepare for the future, that we do to help address that issue?
I think it's so important for us to have an open discussion on all of these. It's very important for us to convey, not necessarily directly, but indirectly, by having a very, very beautiful environment inside your schools, where there is a kind of open discussion where I'm able to express my emotions. And as rightly said, even in the previous panel, that even our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds should be able to say, I'm angry, just leave me alone for 5 minutes. If I can accept that emotion, I think we have solved half our problems. We have to teach our children how important it is for them to say that. It's also important for parents at home to say that I've had a bad day at work. I just leave me alone for 15 minutes, I'll come back and play with your son. Rather than saying, when the child says, put down the paper, Papa, play with me, instead of the father retorting back or answering back or being very rude to the child. But the child doesn't know what the father has gone through. In a similar manner, in our classrooms, if the teachers are able to talk to the children in the class, so it's not necessary that it's the school counselor who has to do. Every teacher has to be a counselor. Every parent has to be a counselor. And we all, as educationists, have to be counselors. We have to understand the child. We have to accept emotions. And don't be under the impression that adults do not have it. I was just talking to her and I said, people camouflage it. People cover it up. So there is something that's an inner self which we don't want, and we refuse to drop the guard. So somewhere along, we have to create that friendly atmosphere where people can talk about difficulties, and those are difficulties that cannot be a classroom discussion and cannot be a staff room point of discussion in the staff rooms. So it's personal. And can we have mentors in the school who are maybe experienced, more mature, who can understand people and come out with solutions, which is also a wonderful way. Most of these problems get solved, or at least when they're addressed or they're heard, they feel much better. And then if they really need help, they need therapy, you can think about. What I've done in my school is, during the COVID, we realized that a lot of our children who were special children, it's a very inclusive school, and could not go on for online classes. So on an emergency, with the help of the police, I got special permissions, and we actually started a therapy center and a special center where these special children were given permission by the government and the police authorities to come to the center and have classes with their special educators. So that, the school had to go. So that's where I think the role of the principal or the school leader comes, where you can break, and that's why I said about conformity. Everything, it was a rule. No one could move out during lockdown. But we found ways by which we could get special permission, because these two kids, a lot of them, would have just remained at home doing nothing. So something of that kind, and I think it helped the parents de-stress. I will give you one more example. We have in our therapy center a child of my own school, about 5 years of age. And the mother would come, she looked very stressed out. And after about 3 months, we realized we needed to talk to the mother because she needed help too. And when we spoke to her, she said, ever since this child was born, being special, my family decided that I have to stay at home and I have to give up everything for the sake of this child. The child had ADHD, is autistic also, and therefore she just couldn't leave the child alone at any point of time. So we decided that she would come 3 days a week for her consultation, but she would be given all permissions to leave the child at our center for 2.5 hours. And she had her my time. That space helped her come out of her depression. It helped her. She said, I started going to the malls, and after ages I was going to a mall. So for her, she's a young parent, 28 years of age. She wanted to see the world outside. So we gave her that, and there were days that she could tell us that, ma'am, can you just keep him over here for 5 hours? I just want to go out and come. Can we do that for our parents as well? Because even the parent is important for us. Our schools are community centers. It has to be completely for all our parents, students, and teachers. So it's not just about children being taken care of. It is also about all adults who are involved. Because if the parent is affected or if the teacher is affected, your child will be affected. And it's always a process of great communication, great community. And for that, I just have one sentence: build a culture of care, build a culture of empathy and well-being in our schools. We have a great school to go to.
I love that. Our schools are community centers, right? So when we're thinking about a vision for our schools down the road, can we build our schools as community centers? Dr. Arunabh, would you like to add?
I realize we are the last session before lunch. I will attempt to be brief. But then I'm an educator and I work in 40-minute intervals. My daughter asked me this question. We'd taken her to a Gandhi museum and we were talking about Gandhi to her. And she was 7 years of age. And one day she asked me that after Nathuram Godse killed Gandhiji, did his parents still love him? I had to process that question of what the response to that is going to be and try to think of what is this child really asking me. My interpretation of it was, when I do something really, really wrong, will you as my parent still be by my side? And of course, my answer is irrelevant. But that child's question of how important or worthwhile am I as a human, and what is the purity of your and my relationship, is something much deeper. I spoke about this communal ownership of children earlier and how that is starting to get disintegrated. And I feel these children and often sometimes teachers are finding themselves very alone in the world that they live in. I connect this to technology and say, all the mobile phone advertisements that you see talk about how great photographs their cameras click. Not how wonderful they are in connectivity, but how lovely camera they have, and they actually pre-filter the photograph for you and make you look much better than you are in person, because they're projecting a persona that the world is receiving. So in that world, these children are growing up and our teachers are growing up as well. So I'm not surprised that so many of educators here are feeling there is a challenge with mental health. But we need to make provision in our families, in our schools, for these partnerships to exist where I can speak my mind and know, more importantly, that even if nobody has a solution, there is somebody out there who's ready to listen to me. Thank you.
Dr. Madhav?
Yes. I won't mind if lunch gets delayed, because it is an important issue. I'm taking the liberty of taking out an audio. I did not leave this stage to show disrespect to the people sitting here. I heard this yesterday, and I think all of us should listen, because this is the person who has suffered or who is suffering from the mental health issues. And I think perhaps after listening to her, we will be able to understand and appreciate the intensity.
Storyteller, career mentor, an artist. One of the things that I'm really passionate about and I work with and work on is mental health and emotional health. And I don't do it because it's something that it's a very cool thing to do, or because everybody around me is doing it. I come from a very personal space when it comes to mental health and emotional health. I remember my first anxiety attack, and I remember not knowing what was happening to me. And I remember that it left me exhausted, and that exhaustion sort of turned into sadness, a sadness that I wasn't able to wear off, a sadness that I wasn't able to sort of just remove like a piece of clothing and keep aside. I remember treating it like a sprained ankle. You bandage it, you take your painkiller, you put a balm, and you move on with your life. But again, if a sprained ankle hurts for too long, you have to see a doctor. So if that sadness, whether the cause is known or unknown, stays around for too long, and even if not sadness, that uncomfortable feeling of not being yourself and not knowing why and not understanding how to walk through it stays too long, you go see a doctor. I spoke to my parents and I started seeking therapy. And it wasn't as simple as it sounds right now. The confidence to talk about it, I think, comes from years of going through it constantly and consistently and persistently on an everyday basis, I feel. I think one thing that whoever wants to seek therapy should keep in mind is that it's not like buying something online, that you find it, you put it in your cart, you pay for it and you get it delivered. It's a process. So a lot of times you'll have to move from one person to another to actually find a fit, a person who makes you feel comfortable, safe, but at the same time is strong enough to sort of call you out on your bullshit very kindly when need be. You have to like their personality, you have to like their behavior, you have to like the space that they create for you. I think feeling safe with your therapist is the biggest prerequisite. And it's not hard to find, but it's a process to find it. I remember telling my parents about my anxiety, and they were very supportive of whatever I needed to do next. And I remember telling my friends about it. But then I also remember not telling so many people about it. And then realizing that not being able to share this with, say, my employer leaves me at a disadvantage, because they don't know that I wasn't able to do something on time because a day before I was going through an anxiety attack and it has left me exhausted. And that is when I decided that I have to start talking about it slowly, not as an excuse, but coming from a place of extreme awareness and sincerity, that they should know that I struggle with a few things and I will be honest about it. And all I need is a little extra buffer time to do a few things. And I think
It's a long thing, but the person is talking about acceptance. The person is talking about safe space. Person is talking about talking. And person is also talking about sincerity. So as caretakers, there are few things which we need to look into. First is that are we able to give them the safe space without being judgmental so that they can talk about it. Why I have shared this is because it's coming from my personal space. And I know exactly how it feels when you have someone who is suffering from mental illness. It's not a theory for me, it is not an assumption for me. The same child met with an accident and she had a head injury, and after that, everything got compounded. And she is talking about all this after facing it for last good 6-7 years. Now, my point as a teacher and as a parent is, what could be the reason? And that's the question we should be asking ourselves. That what could be the reason of this anxiety? What is the source? Should we get busy with addressing it? Or should, side by side, we should also find the reason? Are we working in isolation with our kids? Only the cerebral, only the mental, only what is being seen outside? Are we working on our kids enough to strengthen them from within? What does it take to strengthen them from within so that they are able to navigate their lives with confidence? So these are a few questions. I won't take it further. But these are certain questions which we should be asking ourselves, not only as teachers, but also as parents.
Yeah,
Sorry for taking so much of time.
It was worth it, Madhav. What we've done to address mental health, pre-pandemic, we did have a counselor in school. And, when children went to the counselor, they would always be, there's still a stigma about the whole thing. But the young people do want to go, and the ones who don't go, they kind of have that. So we kind of created this space which we modeled on, in the Ramayana. When Kaikeyi gets angry, she goes into a different bhavan called the Kop Bhavan. I don't know if you've heard about it. In the Valmiki Ramayana, it's there. So we were wondering, what is this whole Kop Bhavan all about? And then we realized that, it would have fragrances, it would have spaces which would cool your, calm your emotions, it would have music, lots of things. So somehow we modeled that little space which has soothing music there, absolutely empty, you could just go and sit there. And if you wish at the end of the day or end of the session, there is a little worksheet that we provided, then the child doesn't have to write the name, just a few reflective questions are there, and the child answers them. And then our counselor looks at them, some of them do write names. And we discovered that we had children coping with so many difficulties, apart from, a father beating his wife, to perhaps a gender identity crisis. And gradually we kind of addressed that. And again, with the background in theater that we had, I got in my theater teacher, the dance teacher. So now, what happens is we express our emotions, even in your classroom. We don't clap. Okay, so if the teacher has taught well, or if the answer from a child is very good, then, the teacher goes into the Adbhut Rasa, and, they do that. Or if the teacher is angry with a student, she doesn't yell or shout, but she will frown, like the anger, the veer. I mean, the different rasas we've practiced. We do a lot of theater games which are based on psychology, to do these. And apart from that, of course, we work on the mental health of our teachers, which I think is so important. So I think every week, we don't work on Saturdays anymore. Earlier we used to. So the Saturday is dedicated completely to a kind of a circle time by the teachers. So they talk about whatever the issues through circles, issues in school, issues at home also. So it's all teacher-led. Similarly, we have what we call the MEB, My Emotional Well-Being Time. We call that My MEB. And the children drive the circle time. They decide what they wish to discuss. And we've realized that, the teachers just take a back seat. And a lot of discipline issues which perhaps happen in the class are also taken care of when it's a student-led program. And a formal program that we kind of do with a lot of our parents, asking them to, connect with their children, especially when he rightly said, Banaras is a place where, maybe everywhere, but Banaras, I think it's even more, the education is outsourced to the mother. The father wouldn't even bother to come for a PTM. Leave alone. Discipline hua to bhi, the father will not come. So it's a very patriarchal kind of a UP. If there are any UPites here, please forgive me for that. Madhav, you are one? Thank you. Okay, so that's how it is. It's a very Purush Pradhan society that we have in UP. And so coping with such parents also. So fortunately, we brought the fathers into the conversation, and gradually, I hope things will change. But this is just the beginning. It's the last 2.5 years. We've done a lot of experimenting, on this.
So I think those were really, really interesting responses. And I would love to open this up for a minute to the audience, because, I mean, you are all the ones who said we have, 69 responses now saying mental health issues within the community are the biggest challenge within a school. And we also, I think, as the world changes and technology changes, and we've been through a pandemic, and looking forward, I think we're going to have even more rapid change. So I'm sure mental health issues are not going to go away easily. I'd love to have questions from the audience, if you have, for our panelists. And
I just have one observation. So this started as you began talking about mental health. I could see the numbers go up. So there were quite a few people who had not yet made the decision. I'm wondering whether such panels are imposing a cognitive bias on the decision-making of these people.
the way of thinking of it is people feel liberated to add mental health in, because they know they're not alone in that also. So it could be one or the other.
But
for some people.
The same speaker later on says that when I started talking about my mental health, I saw that several of my colleagues also started talking about
They
it.
do.
So there is, not accepting is the problem.
And I know I work with teachers, and I have seen a tremendous rise in mental health issues amongst teachers. And as principals, like Revathi ma'am said, we're not just responsible for the kids, we're also responsible for our teachers. A happy teacher is an effective teacher, right? A teacher who's struggling is going to be less effective in different ways. So how do we also take care of our teachers, our parents, our community? Any other questions or thoughts? I know we have a lot of interesting, principals in the room who might also be able to share.
I'd just like to add that when I work with the babies, 1 to 2 year olds, we learn, I use different puppets, and we learn the basic emotions so that they're able to express those, like happiness, sadness, anger, okay, the basic thing. By the time they're 2, between the 2 to 4 year olds, we go into the other emotions, so that they're, and it's amazing, they pick up so quickly. You just have to work with them to help them to understand what's happening to them. And that's when I think it'll make a big difference.
I'm Shankari from Vidya Mandir Estancia. Nowadays we have nuclear families and single parent concept. Earlier, during our times, school days, we didn't have a counselor in our school. Maybe I studied around 1970 or in that time. And now we find counselors being increasing. I think because of the nuclear families concept. Earlier we used to share our emotions with the grandparents and everyone. And also single parent concept is there. So the children, all the children, they think they are right. And they want everyone to accept that they are right. And they are justifying things now. Okay, that is the thing. So because of this change, I think it will lead further to confusions in the future. And even his parents are facing the same mental stress. And the children, I can narrate an example from a school side. I have a child whose mother is a single parent. And the child wants to satisfy the mother's aspirations also. And to do that, she's suffering a lot. She's not able to compromise the family side as well as the school side. So we are doing a lot of counseling for that. But she's a very bright child. So we are facing a lot of issues, as Sir and the panelists said, nowadays. So the only thing is we have to keep our fingers crossed and look for solutions in the future. Thank you.
So hi, this is Rupa Arun here. And I have a little thought which I wanted to take ahead. And I would request the panel to contribute in terms of what their ideas are with regard to this. So one of the websites, this is Ignite Mind, talks about the school being a reflection of the society and the society being a reflection of the school. So as custodians of so many children and the bright future and the health of the society in general and in specific of the students, shouldn't we be contributing more towards the thought process of the society in terms of enabling them to accept the various conditions that exist? If children do come with these different kinds of mindsets or issues or problems or anything that we are talking about, being able to empathize with them would happen if the society joins hand in accepting what the situation is. So the question is, as schools and as school leaders, should we be educating them more through different kinds of communication? Not just leave it to the the government and the press and others, but as school bodies, as societies or representation of the society, shouldn't we be taking this ahead further and educating them and saying that these are certain things that exist? Because most of the times, the parents themselves become the barricade. They are not willing to accept that there is something wrong and a different approach is needed. And that becomes a stumbling block for most schools. So that's something that I would like you all to share your ideas and expertise in. Thank you.
So just to make sure I understand the question, it's about parent education as well. Should we be educating our parents more?
Yes, taking them alongside and telling them that these different things exist, because most of the times that's where the issue is. So the teacher becomes almost impossible to convince the parent that, there is something else that we need to be assisting the child with. And that kind of support has to extend even at home, not just in the premises of the school.
Thank you for giving this opportunity to continue the thought. This is very much regarding parenting and educating the parents also. Sometimes parents look at their children from their positions. They are not looking at the children as children. The previous panel spoke about, now if after he killed Gandhi, did his parents continue to love him? That question, you remember? And then we had a beautiful example of how. Now I want to know, why do parents take the complaints of children seriously? When the complaint is favorable to them, to their status. So this is one aspect which everyone should look into. And definitely, I would like the panel to share their views on this. Thank you.
So just for the panel, what do you think in terms of parent education and partnerships with parents and working together with parents to help these issues? Who would like to
I think an involved and an informed parent is perhaps the need of the hour. So if we can involve parents in as much as we can do with school and inform them of as much as what we are doing in school, then I think this should perhaps take care of. But it may not go away, as I said. I agree with, I think, both these women who very rightly said, my experience with my students, I'm a very student-friendly principal. Unfortunately, my management thankfully now agrees. But earlier it used to be, "Mera darwaza hamesha khula hai." I will be, as somebody, I think, General was talking in the morning, in the breaks I'm always outside. Between period changes I am there, not to discipline them, but just to talk about them. So when I interact with them, I find that there is a lot of acceptance that they have about their friends than what as teachers or adults we have. In spite of all the experience that I've had, for a minute I wonder and say, I try and judge this child, acha. And then I realize, what am I doing? So this is something that this generation, so should be a lot of peer educators happening, parent peer education happening, rather than, you sitting and lecturing and saying parent workshop, vagera. Parent ambassador, we call it the parent pilot project. I love alliterations. So a parent pilot is one who kind of meets a few parents once in a month outside the school. It's got nothing to do with the school. I mean, they can do their kitty parties, and from there, they moved on. Initially, yes, when we said, we did feel as a senior leadership team, we felt, ye kya hoga? They might just gossip, they might talk, they'll get together. We said, just let them do what they want. And then very gradually now, there is a small effective group that is educating parents.
So we have something called Soulful Saturdays. So for the past 5 years, and it's a very successful program, a particular answer to the question that was asked is that it's very natural, and my answer is that it's very natural that the parent moves in a denial mode, because it's very difficult for any parent to accept. And the first question that comes to their mind is, why me? So I think that's where it comes from. So the best part of it is that if we have these kind of sessions, which are free sessions for parents where they can just drop in, we take in registrations just because we want to know which are the parents who are coming or who are the parents who are coming in almost every week. So every Saturday we have these 2-hour sessions. We have experts coming in, and as well as the school counselors who address. the different topics just thrown in as a basket. So every Saturday, there is one particular topic on a mental issue that's taken up. It could be behavioral problems in children. It could be something to do with depression. It could be something just to do non-acceptance, hundreds of topics, and topics also come in from parents. When these topics are discussed in public, my initial experience was that there were never any questions from the parents. At the end, we used to have a half-an-hour question-answer session, and there would never be questions. Now, parents boldly say, my child is in this class, and he's got this problem. How do I address it? For example, with a kindergarten child, it could be a problem like biting other children, right? So I have this problem. How do I address it? So I think it comes with over the years that, and the more we open up, the more people will start talking about it, because they'll start assuming that, yes, somebody is coming, doing an intervention. It is a correction. That's about it.
Can I ask my question now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we have been focusing quite a lot on the symptoms that we notice in children, like when they have mental issues. But the thing is, when children come to me and I speak to them, I find that their identity building does not happen. We actually, as educators, take identity building for granted in children, and they look out for appreciation, acceptance, and approval of others in their environment, and they connect their identity just to that. So the thing is, rather than leaving identity building to chance, can't we really focus on building a stronger identity for a child where he does not just relate himself to a name or a relationship, but to something bigger than that, when he can make choices for himself, whether he is good or not, rather than depending upon the opinions of others in an environment that judge him?
And this is something that comes to my mind from 2004. This professor was teaching us teacher development, and his last class, one thing he said which still resonates with me, where he said, experience does not teach you anything. And then he took a long pause. He says, experience does not teach you anything, but reflecting on your experience does. As our children navigate this life as we've never experienced before, and as our teachers experience life as they've never experienced before, if we provide more room for conversations, or more rooms for disagreements, and like the previous panel was talking about, not wanting to be in the room with the person with all the right answers, accepting that that human died a long time ago who knew everything about everything, we would perhaps be making our spaces more friendly, happier, and healthier, and in turn lead to more partnerships between students and teachers, and with parents as well. One thing we make our children do, jumping back to the previous conversation on mental health, in the feedback that we take from children, we ask them this one question: do you have one friend in the school? The question is fairly simple: do you have one friend in the school? But if the answer to that is no, can you imagine how alone that child is feeling? So we need to reflect on our own practices and allow children to reflect as well. And I believe we would be closer to the answer. But will we be where you want us to be? I don't know. It's a work in progress.
Dr. Madhav, do you want to share any last thought before we wrap up? Or?
Two things. Schools with resources could look into profile building of the kids. It takes an effort and approach, but the schools with the resources can do that, identify the strengths and weaknesses of the kids and work with them individually. And as far as the parents' responsibility is concerned, I don't know, it is because of the age or some other factor, but whenever I accept a child, especially till class 5, I accept the set of parents as second set of children. And I take it obligatory on me that I have to teach 2 sets now.
Actually, I just want to wrap up with one thought. When I was teaching, I had a mentor teacher who told me before parent conferences, I was very anxious about a couple of parents. And she said, Maya, parents are anxious. So if they are angry or combative or anything, it's actually because there's anxiety behind that. Because a parent wants their child to succeed and be happy so badly. So if you remember that whatever is coming at you is coming from a place of anxiety, and you empathize with that, it's going to change the conversation. And actually for me in my career, it's been very true. As soon as I empathize and realize that things are coming from a place of anxiety, not take it personally, the whole conversation becomes quite different. So that was my experience. But I just want to say a very big thank you. I feel like I've learned so much listening to all of you, and I want to continue this conversation in whatever way we can. And I also want to say a big thank you to our audience. As principals, we have such a big responsibility. And like somebody said earlier today, the quality of a society rests on the effectiveness of principals and schools and the work we do. So thank you all so much for being part of this discussion, for sharing your thoughts, and just a big thank you to everybody.